Today we remember and we light a candle for Roy McKay, who died on November 2nd at the age of 88. The story of Roy's life is one of challenges and resiliency. He had a difficult childhood with parents who were distant and distracted, leaving him to fend for himself and to be a parent for his siblings. As a young adult, he was a soldier in World War II, something in which he took pride, even as he often reminded us, especially during our Memorial Day services when he would wear his military uniform, which still fit 50 years after he first wore it. He would remind us that war is hell on earth. He didn't speak much of his time in battle, but he did tell the story of a fellow soldier with the last name of Miracle who saved his life. When Roy, from his place in a foxhole, made a move to help others who had been wounded by enemy fire, Mr. Miracle held him back, encouraging him to understand that staying put was the best way to save the one life that he could, his own. Thanks to this miracle, Roy lived to see many more days, including when he and his fellow soldiers stormed Omaha Beach on D-Day. Roy leaned upon the lessons of his Baptist upbringing and his belief in a God that forgives us, accepts us, and guides us even through our darkest days, and he had his share. A first marriage brought him 3 daughters he adored, more difficult days, and eventually divorce. Even as he built a successful real estate and insurance business, he struggled with an addiction to gambling that he tamed through treatment and internal commitment. He founded a Gambling Anonymous chapter and actively oversaw its meetings for years. When his marriage finally ended, Roy dated, but had trouble finding a woman who could keep up with his many interests and active lifestyle until he found Jody Anderson, who was at least his match in energy and spirit. When he met his doll, as he called her, he said it was as if the sun had finally come out. He and Jody made an exceptional pair, we know this. Wide open in their approach to their lives, they shared 25 happy and active years together. A few years back, Roy was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. It was a cruel twist of fate for a man with his healthy and active lifestyle. Even up to the end, Roy yearned to wring all that he could out of his life, and we can imagine him running into whatever world may be beyond us with his wide-open, adventure-seeking, wholehearted style. Today we remember and we light a candle for Xenda Lindel, who died on November 22nd at the age of 70. Xenda was an irreverent, irascible, and irrepressible lover and fighter whose presence could alternately dominate and comfort a room. We remember her cantankerous opinions and her compassionate companionship, her stories and her stuckness, her laughter and her lightheartedness, her anger and her advocacy, her fearless way of saying what she thought, and her fearful need to be heard. We remember how she loved our children and how she loved live music, often shouting, "Yes!" and "Yahoo!" in response to both. She was the mother of 4, the grandmother of 3, and a friend to many, especially here. She was frank with us about much of her life, including how she was a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. She lived a frugal life in her tiny bungalow, focusing on simple pleasures. She was generous with her artistic talent, offering her handiwork to causes in need of quilts to auction, creating many of the hangings we use in church, including the one behind me, sewing choir stoles, making beautiful works of art for people the way others send greeting cards. She probably knew more people in the church than anyone else, an impressive feat for someone who liked to portray herself as a loner. I don't know how she did it exactly, how she made herself so available to so many, offering love that was rough around the edges and surprisingly perfect much of the time. The parade of people, particularly women, who journeyed with her the last few months of her life was a testimony to the impact she had. I think it was the way we could be ourselves in her presence. I can say there was never a time when I worried about what I would say to her. I didn't have to hold back or censor myself. Maybe it's because I knew that she wouldn't. She was totally transparent, available, real, flawed, actually, beautifully so, willing to disagree, to argue, to blurt out what she thought, and to backtrack when she realized she had said something that wasn't fair or true. She was earthy, of this world. She had that hard-fought wisdom that comes from experiencing pain and disappointment, that comes from having screwed up a bunch and survived. And she was not afraid to grow. Actually, she was very afraid to grow, but she did it anyway, again and again and again. She spoke often during the decade I knew her of how she would be ready to go when her time came, of how she had suffered enough in this life, and that she would welcome the chance to rest at last. So when she received the cancer diagnosis in the spring of 2012 and faced decisions about her future, many of us were not surprised that she chose to refuse treatment. It was a tough choice, and given what she knew about her options, a good choice for her. Knowing that her time was truly limited enabled her to soak up as much of her life as she could the last few months, and many of her friends helped her do that, including at the celebration of her life that we shared in this room in October before she died, in which a community poem was written by those attending, a poem that went on for more than 15 minutes. I know she was grateful for every kindness shown to her, every thoughtful gesture, every shared laugh and warm embrace. We know, don't we, this church is just not the same without her. We remember and light a candle for Mauro Valado, who died on January 1st at the age of 32. Most of us only knew Mauro for a short time, but those of us who know his story and who have had the opportunity to get to know his wife, Rebecca, and his daughters, feel his absence in powerful ways. Mauro and Rebecca met in his native Brazil, where Rebecca was traveling with college friends on a spring break trip to experience capoeira, the Brazilian martial art that combines music and dance, that expresses a passion for human agency and possibility, and that was for Mauro a way of life. The couple fell in love in Brazil, and Rebecca stretched her spring break trip into a several-month stay. Eventually, the couple moved to Iowa, where they were married, where their first daughter, Bianca, was born. Mauro worked various jobs here, all the while teaching capoeira at night. In 2005, Mauro began having seizures and was eventually diagnosed with a brain tumor that required surgery in 2007. The surgery was a success, and the young family continued with their lives, moving to California in 2010. Just before their second child, Isabel, was born, a regular MRI indicated the tumor had returned, and soon it had become inoperable. The family came back to Iowa, where they could be surrounded in the love and support of their family and friends. In the remaining months of his life, Mauro navigated the ever-increasing seizures the best that he could, wanting to squeeze out the life that was left, leaving as little undone as possible. He took his last breath on New Year's Day, holding Rebecca's hand while she nursed Isabel. Mauro, known in the capoeira community as Xenda, was a man with enormous energy and vitality, a welcoming presence with gentle eyes, a wonderful teacher, mentor, father, and friend. Even in his short life, he had a significant influence on many and leaves behind a loving family that will carry on his tender influence and his joyful and graceful way of being in the world. We remember and light a candle for Cathy Hladky, who died on January 10th at the age of 85. Raised on a farm near West Liberty, Iowa, Cathy seized opportunities to strike out on her own. Upon graduation from high school, she taught at a one-room schoolhouse for 3 years, boarding with a local family, before studying journalism at Drake, where she met her future husband, George, who was a fellow student. Following his military service, which took the young couple to Louisiana and Maine, George became an admissions counselor at Simpson College, beginning an enduring connection for the family to the town of Indianola. There they raised 2 sons and began an advertising newspaper in town, remembered by most as The Reminder, a paper that they published together for 30 years. It was a team effort, with George serving as the public face of the paper and Cathy doing much of the behind-the-scenes business work. The couple became fixtures in their community, bridging gaps between Indianola, old and new. They were active in local politics, became known as people who would stand up for those without a voice. George was elected to terms as mayor of Indianola and as Warren County supervisor, while Cathy was active in committees and on boards. After a long and successful run at the paper, just as they were nearing retirement, George succumbed to lung cancer. Cathy was his primary care provider. Saying goodbye after 44 years of marriage was tough for Cathy. Nevertheless, she stayed involved in many activities and causes, including Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, Habitat for Humanity, this congregation, and its Unity Circle group. In 2004, she made a long-awaited move to the Village, a retirement community in Indianola, where she found a good mix of independence and community with supportive and interesting people. She was very happy there. Her final days came quickly and unexpectedly. Warm, friendly, and ever focused on the inherent worth and dignity of others, Cathy left behind a legacy of public service and countless connections to the people of Indianola and to those in our congregation who had the opportunity to know her. Today we remember and light a candle for Ardsley Burton Powley, a man we know as Burt, who died on February 2nd at the age of 81. As a child, Burt had been challenged by polio, leading him to spend time in a children's center in his home state of New York. He wore leg braces as a child and was often teased, at least until his stepfather taught him how to box, which enabled him to successfully take matters into his own hands. In the story of his life, Burt played many parts. He was a father, a Little League baseball coach, an actor with the Des Moines Playhouse, performing in at least one show on this very stage. And he was a DJ for KSO and KIOA in the 60s and 70s. He appeared as Frank N. Stein during live remotes, and he had a devoted fan club. Later in life, he worked for the Institute for Social and Economic Development as a small business advisor, and later worked under Governor Branstad for the Iowa Department of Economic Development, retiring in 1997, which is also when he married his second wife, Jerry, with whom he had shared a special friendship going back many years. He did not like to dwell on his past, seeing in the story of his life many mistakes. He said, though, that his marriage to Jerry made him the nice person he always wanted to be. We remember and light a candle for Barbara Jean Amos, who most of us know as Bobbie. Bobbie died on March 23rd at the age of 85. Upon graduation from North High School, she earned an arts degree from Drake. She enjoyed most of a 25-year marriage to her husband, Bill, that brought the couple 2 adopted children. Bobbie and Bill made a good team, which was especially important when Bill decided to buy into a new restaurant chain in California where they were living at the time, known as Picnic and Chicken. His imagination was captured by the restaurant's drive-through window feature, and he believed that Iowans might take to this newfangled way to get their food. So in 1976, the family moved to Des Moines to open up a Picnic and Chicken on 86th Street, the Des Moines area's first drive-through restaurant. The family all pitched in, and for a few years they did well. But a drive-through only restaurant was a bit tough to sustain in Iowa, especially during the winter months, and the restaurant had to be closed. Her husband had other entrepreneurial pursuits, including, I'm sad to say, infidelity that ended their marriage. Following their divorce, Bobbie was hired at CDS, where she worked for 7 years until she retired. In the mid-90s, Bobbie was diagnosed with stomach cancer and received treatments that left her cancer-free and healthy until 2 years ago, when lung cancer began its assault on her body, an assault that would take her life. In her later years, Bobbie kept herself busy with volunteering, social get-togethers, and participating in this church, where she was an active member, serving on the crews that assembled our monthly mailings and attending the activities of Unity Circle. Even as her health declined this past winter, she may not have known how close to the end she truly was. Or perhaps, having lived through cancer before, she believed that she would live through this battle as well. Sadly, though, her choice to outwardly deny what was happening may have kept some of those who knew and loved her best from saying their goodbyes. But we must rest assured that this is how Bobbie wanted it to be. One of her go-to sayings was, "Just humor me and do what I ask." I suppose we could view the last months of her life this way, too. Bobbie asked us, in her way, to just humor her, and so we did, giving her the chance to approach her death the way she wanted, with dignity, with grace, and with privacy. In her life, amidst the bitter and the sweet, she did her best to make things beautiful, to take the whole of life and all its moods, and create harmony the very best that she could. And finally, today, we remember and light a candle for Pat Larson, who died on May 18th at the age of 81. Pat was only a member here for a few years, but left a big impression with her always well-coiffed hair, her long dress pants, button-downs, and jackets, and the largest pieces of jewelry you can imagine, but that somehow she always carried off. She enjoyed a long, healthy marriage to her husband, Elvin, and held many jobs in her life, including secretarial positions, farm wife, high school English teacher, real estate broker, curriculum writer, and teacher trainer. She raised 2 children, and upon receiving her teaching degree, taught at the high school in Independence where they would attend. While in Independence, Pat started becoming active politically, teaming up on an effort led by a local Catholic priest to protest the Vietnam War. Not a popular position to take in her small community. I'm told her husband would raise an American flag in their front yard just to kind of deter people who didn't know what was going on. She became chair of the negotiating committee for the local teachers union, helping to put into place some of Iowa's first collectively negotiated teacher contracts. Much to the dismay of the school administration at the time, she also taught Black history and literature, arranging for student visits to a predominantly Black school in Waterloo. She was appointed by the Buchanan County Board of Supervisors to the board of an effort to develop programs to assist the poor, bringing her into relationship with some of the problems of urban and rural poverty. Exhilarated by the experience, she set up a medical oversight agency for the county and sat on a regional medical board, all the while teaching and raising her family. Looking back, she wondered how she got it all done. Her mother, who lived with her family in the mid-1980s, suffered a stroke and began 2 months of medical intervention that she would have never chosen and which Pat diligently fought. The injustice made a big impression on Pat. She later said she never forgave or forgot the experience, and she spent much of the remainder of her life working for the rights of people to make their own end-of-life decisions and to have those choices honored, including several years as the president of an Iowa chapter of Compassion and Choices, an advocacy group for death with dignity. As Pat knew her days were winding down, she was relieved to be able to spend the last 8 weeks at home in hospice care to experience the kind of death for which she worked hard for others to have, one with dignity and tender moments with family and friends, one of peace. We remember all of our friends this day.